The Venezuelan government is delving further into investigations of the ring of corruption surrounding sectors of the opposition. Hundreds of Central American migrants entered Mexican territory after crossing the Suchiate River this Thursday. The World Health Organization said it is still too early to declare the coronavirus that emerged in China as a public health emergency of international concern, given its restrictive and binary nature. From the headquarters of Telesur English, this is From the South. I'm Katrina Goss. Hundreds of Central American migrants entered Mexican territory after crossing the Suchiate River this Thursday. In the early hours of today, migrants gathered in Tecoloman City to depart towards the Suchiate River, which is the natural border between Mexico and Guatemala, an area where the numbers of officers of the Mexican National Guard has reduced. Migrants continue to condemn the Mexican government's position. They claim it serves the anti-immigrant interests of the United States.
Yes, when we were on the Guatemalan border, they were offering us political asylum here in Mexico, with various opportunities, but the members of the caravan still had many doubts, because they were scared they would be sent back home, to Honduras. So we were scared, but now we want to continue ahead. We are here in Mexican territory, and we have already spoken with the authorities. There is an agreement that we can move freely. We can advance, and we can also obtain political asylum if we wish to.
Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez responded to Bolivia's de facto president Julian Assange after she attempted to discredit the medical cooperation offered by Cuba during Evo Morales' presidency. Rodriguez denounced on Twitter the vulgar lies of the de facto president, who during a speech at the government palace criticized Morales' policies and lashed out against former bilateral medical agreements between Cuba and Bolivia. The return of Cuban medical staff to the island last November has deprived the Bolivian nation of more than 450,000 operations. The Cuban foreign minister noted as such on Twitter. The Venezuelan government is delving further into investigations of the ring of corruption involving sectors of the opposition, as today marks 1 year since right-wing figure Juan Guaidó proclaimed himself president of the country. In a press conference, Communications Minister Jorge Rodriguez outlined some of the indications that the opposition's coup efforts have become a big business. He added that supposed humanitarian aid funds had been used by different opposition figures for their own enrichment.
Perfectamente claro que no en modo alguno son operaciones.
In no way these operations or attempts at rhetoric, propaganda, publicity, no. We are simply showing what, in a moment of desperation, some media outlets, such as Pan Am Post, the Washington Post, Reuters Agency, and Humberto Calderón Berti himself, made of Guaidó.
Hicieran de el señor Guaidó. Hagamos un poquito de memoria.
We should recall that in June 2019, the Pan Am Post website in English reported that Juan Guaidó's envoy had pocketed the funds for humanitarian aid.
De cambio de régimen, la administración Trump.
In a regime change operation, the Trump administration chose a nondescript figure, a deputy who was elected with a little less than 90,000 votes in a circuit of La Guaira state.
90,000 votos en un circuito del estado La Guaira, esos son 0,45.
It is very important to remember that is the 0.45% of voters on Venezuela's electoral register, and they came up with a plot to rapidly bring down the constitutional government established by the vote of the people, of President Nicolás Maduro, and replace him with this nondescript being.
Nicolás Maduro y sustituirlo por este ser.
And social movements from over 50 countries have gathered in Caracas, Venezuela for the International Anti-Imperialist Meeting. Participants hope to create a united platform to combat the interventionist attacks of the United States.
Discussions, debates, meetings between local producers, forums on art, economy, communication, and geopolitics are just some of the events that make up the schedule of the First World Forum Against Imperialism. The start of the forum was marked by a tribute to the late Iranian general Qasem Soleimani, who was slain by U.S. forces early this month.
In the name of our party and of our people, I want to officially open this international meeting of anti-imperialist peoples for all of you and for the world.
From Venezuela to Syria, from Cuba to Spain, diverse people reject U.S. interests, calling them a distressing presence across the world.
North American imperialism stands against humanity, against liberty, and the self-determination of all people. They may use different names, but imperialism will always be the enemy of global progress.
The reality of Venezuela is seen as an example to follow thanks to the tenacity of its people, who have fought for years against threats and attacks by foreign powers.
You, Venezuelans, comrades, you must resist. Have strength, because your fight is fundamental for workers, for your children, for my children, and for all humanity.
While Mike Pompeo and his puppet Juan Guaidó traveled the world, we came together in Caracas to fight for peace, just as they continue to ask for more sanctions against Venezuela.
The forum hopes to establish self-determination, sovereignty, and peace as the guiding principles of global politics.
This is a crucial moment when we must reflect on this geopolitical transition, on our next steps to reach a more plural world. The empire is afraid and is willing to do anything to keep their power. We saw this a few weeks ago when they murdered General Soleimani.
Imperialism is an ideology, and we have a different ideology that stands against them. We are here for socialism, for the development of our people, for equality, for human rights, against racism and sexism.
This forum will also be accompanied by a march of Venezuela's social movements, a meeting with President Nicolás Maduro, and a number of local art shows.
And in Brazil, former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has said that the Venezuelan people must resolve their own internal issues without foreign interference. Lula called opposition lawmaker Juan Guaidó a con artist. Telesur's correspondent in Brazil, Brian Meir, interviewed the former president alongside journalists Daniel Hunt and Michael Brooks.
I think the Americans woke up and said the following: hold on a second, Latin America is ours, and we will not allow that the Chinese continue acquiring Latin America. There was this foolishness and rudeness against Venezuela, because that was rude. The idea that you would recognize a con artist, a congressman, who titled himself President of the Republic. Imagine if this fad takes hold around the world. And what I think is mediocre is that countries around the world approved of it. That this guy could try to commit a coup by declaring himself president, and that would be it. If you want to be president, run in the elections, win them, and take over the job. If Maduro has problems, he is a problem for the people of Venezuela. It's not a problem for the American people, for the Brazilians, for the Chinese. It is the people of Venezuela who have to worry about Maduro. I defend this for Venezuela. I defend this for the United States. I defend this for Brazil.
And tensions between indigenous leaders and the Ecuadorian government have increased after President Lenin Moreno denied that human rights violations occurred during protests in October. This is in spite of reports by international organizations proving otherwise.
Tensions have soared after President Lenin Moreno gave an address to the nation, rejecting the impending legal action against his government for human rights violations. Several local and international organizations have documented and strongly condemned these incidents.
Fellow citizens, you know I'm a peaceful person. Only a few things disturb me, and this is one of them. Ecuador has received, with great indignation, threats of legal action for the alleged abuse of protesters by law enforcement in October 2019. These very people who threatened the security and democracy of our country.
Several Ecuadorian human rights organizations banded together to expose the violations that occurred in last October's protests. Still, authorities continue to deny the use of force against demonstrators.
I think the statements made by the Interior Minister, the Foreign Ministry, and even by the President are out of place. They don't apply in cases where people have been persecuted. I believe citizens already know what we're demanding at the International Court of Human Rights.
The International Human Rights Commission has already acknowledged human rights violations by the Ecuadorian government.
It's unfair that the government refuses to accept these reports with the same enthusiasm that they had when they invited the International Commission to conduct its investigation. The government can't even admit their violent crimes. And let's be clear, it's the government's responsibility to avoid these incidents.
According to indigenous leaders, the persecution continues.
There are 4 matters before the courts where 7 leaders are being persecuted, my colleague and I included. We're going to attend 6 hearings to prove what occurred, and we intend to refer to the recent reports by the UN and the IHRC. I mean, when is this going to end? The entire country was in turmoil because of the government's measures.
Victims have united to sue the government for their individual cases, but more importantly, to demand justice.
And coming up in Zimbabwe. Welcome back. The World Health Organization said it is still too early to declare the coronavirus that emerged in China as a public health emergency of international concern, given its restrictive and preliminary nature. The Emergency Committee on the New Coronavirus urged to support ongoing efforts through a WHO international multidisciplinary mission, including national experts. The mission would review and support efforts to investigate the animal source of the new coronavirus outbreak, the extent of human-to-human transmission, and the screening efforts in other provinces of China.
Indeed, we do expect the numbers to grow much larger. Because, as you might notice, the first cases were the ones that are more easily recognizable, and the earlier search was for those cases with severe condition, with pneumonia. This is because there's a seasonal influenza happening. So this is a virus that has emerged under the camouflage of millions of cases of milder respiratory infection. So finding the cases is actually quite difficult and a major feat that has to be done by the public health investigators.
World leaders and Holocaust survivors gathered today in Jerusalem to mark 75 years since the liberation of Auschwitz, the World War II death camp where Nazis killed more than 1 million people, most of them Jews. The 5th World Holocaust Forum, called Remembering the Holocaust Fighting Anti-Semitism, took place today at Warsaw Ghetto Square in Jerusalem. Over 40 world leaders, including Russian President Vladimir Putin, French President Emmanuel Macron, Britain's Prince Charles, and German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier, attended this Thursday the commemoration to mark the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau and International Holocaust Remembrance Day in honor of the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust and millions of other victims of Nazism.
In the land of the eternal city of Jerusalem, we inaugurate the eternal monument in memory of the defenders and the citizens of Leningrad who were killed in the cruel seal during the World War.
Hundreds of Pakistanis have protested over a bread price hike and shortages in wheat flour. Prices shot up last week and baking ingredients have disappeared from markets. Bakeries have blamed the government for introducing price controls, which they say contributed to the shortages. The government has since approved the import of 300,000 tons of wheat to alleviate the situation.
There's supply of wheat flour, but the cost is very high. The rate of wheat was $25 per 40 kilos 2 weeks ago. Now the rate has gone up to between $33 and $35. That's why people are very upset. We are also upset because the rate is increasing day by day and we have arguments with people. We have arguments with the customers. The prices are very high.
What are they feeding us? All wheat is being grown to feed us. We are human beings. We have the same human rights as Imran Khan has to live in this country. This government has deprived us of this right to live.
And on Thursday, members of the South African Communist Party held a demonstration outside the US Embassy in Pretoria to protest the country's attacks on Iran. The protesters sang revolutionary songs and held banners denouncing what they say is President Donald Trump's obsession with war, highlighting the recent assassination of Iran's top commander general Qasem Soleimani. Party members said they are opposed to imperialist aggressions across the world and vowed to continue protests in South Africa until the US withdraws its forces from the Middle East.
We're picketing here to protest against the US aggression in the Middle East, particularly against Iran, extrajudicial killings, violation of international law. As you know, for instance, recently the killing of General Qasem Soleimani and Comrade Al-Mandi, who were killed by US instruments.
South African Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo has asked the High Court in Pretoria for an extension until December to go further into the inquiry into Jacob Zuma's alleged corruption. The panel asked for the extension in order to summon the former president, although Zuma says he is too sick to testify. However, the leader of the inquiry panel said that the investigation will go further, whether the former president testifies or not.
The legal team has applied for me to authorize the acting secretary to issue a summons against him. That application has been adjourned to allow the legal team to file a replying affidavit, and the matter may still be decided at a later stage.
Zimbabwean students have demonstrated against the high cost of education. A group from the Zimbabwe National Students' Union gathered outside the Ministry of Education to protest against a recent rise in tuition fees. The students delivered a petition to the ministry and called on all students across the nation to join the protests. This comes just a few days after school children also marched against the cost of education. And hundreds of communities in South Sudan have received non-food aid for the first time in more than 20 days after being displaced by severe floods. Around 500,000 people in Maban have been badly affected by the floods, which contaminated sources of drinking water, raising fears of waterborne diseases. Those affected received blankets, plastic covers, mosquito nets, sleeping mats and jerry cans as part of the aid efforts. Swarms of desert locusts in Ethiopia, Kenya and Somalia, unprecedented in their size and destructive power, threaten to ravage the entire East Africa sub-region, the UN warned. Recent weather in the region has created conditions that favour the rapid reproduction of the crop-devouring insects. Left unchecked, their numbers could grow 500 times by June, according to the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization. The speed of the spread of the pest and the size of the infestations are so far beyond the norm that they have stretched the response capacities of local and national authorities to the limit. And after the break, Chinese authorities try to control the spread of the new coronavirus. Welcome back. Mexican health officials have reported 2 suspected cases of the new coronavirus that emerged in China.
We are confident that the country is prepared. We have been doing adjustments throughout 2019, precisely in preparation and response protocols to face health emergencies, and today we are putting them into practice.
House impeachment manager Adam Schiff played clips of President Donald Trump saying Article 2 gives him the right to do whatever he wants as president. The Republican senator implored members of his party late Wednesday to support the introduction of new evidence in the trial, offering several examples of specific recordings and documents that would help the Senate better make a decision about whether Trump should be removed from office.
They risked everything. Their careers. And yes, I know what you're asked to decide may risk yours too. But if they could show the courage, so can we. I yield back.
And staying in the United States, the Trump administration is set to extend its controversial travel ban to citizens from more African and Asian countries. According to media reports, the US government plans to limit visa access for visitors from Belarus, Eritrea, Kyrgyzstan, Myanmar, Nigeria, Sudan and Tanzania. Speaking in Davos on Wednesday, Trump, without giving details, confirmed that more countries would be added to the travel ban list. The original ban was upheld by the Supreme Court after a legal challenge and was widely condemned as mostly targeting citizens of Muslim countries.
No, we're adding a couple of countries to it. We have to be safe. Our country has to be safe. You see what's going on in the world. Our country has to be safe. So we have a very strong travel ban, and we'll be adding a few countries to it.
And UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres told business leaders at the Davos Forum that the world is losing the war against climate change and called for rapid action.
It is absolutely essential to recognize that climate change is an existential threat to us all, and that climate change is running faster than what we are. We are not winning this war, and we absolutely must do it.
Supporters of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange gathered outside a court in London as his hearing to determine whether he will be extradited to the US began. A judge ruled that the trial will be split into 2 phases, with the first hearing scheduled for February and a second in May. Assange faces 17 charges under the US Espionage Act, as well as a charge for allegedly attempting to hack a Pentagon computer system. He has been held in custody since being removed from Ecuador's embassy in London last April.
Are at stake. A free press supports the democratic process in this country. I think it's up to citizens to wake up and raise their voice in defense of our civil rights. And press freedom and freedom of expression is a cornerstone of democracy. For too long, we've left this issue in the matters of others. It's important that everyday people stand up and make their voices heard. Enough is enough.
And at least 1 person has been killed and several injured in a mass shooting in Seattle, the United States. A manhunt has been launched to capture the gunman who opened fire in a popular tourist area. This is the 3rd shooting in the district in less than 2 days, and the latest of several such incidents at churches, cinemas and other public places across the country.
It arrived on scene. We found a total of 6 patients on scene. One of those patients was pronounced dead here at the scene, and the other 5 patients, we consider them red patients, which means that they're critical, so they need to get to the hospital. They were all transported by Seattle Fire units as well as AMR units.
And we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many more stories on our website at telesurenglish.net and follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter